Hey everyone, I'm Scott, and today I want to look at one verse from the teaching of Jesus with you. It's from the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous teaching, and it comes in what we call the Beatitudes, which is a list of sayings that Jesus gave. Now, this Beatitude is really unique because it talks about being sad. Well, one thing you should know about me is I don't like to be sad. I don't like sad movies. I don't like sad songs. I don't like sad books. In fact, when I was in college, I was an English lit major, and I hated sad books, which are basically every book I had to read in college. And so I'd speed read through the really sad parts. Basically, I don't like to be brought down in life. I don't like to be sad. And the thing is, if you take a personality test, like I took one time, I took Dr. Gary Smalley. He has this 5-minute personality test where he associates your personality with an animal. I know that sounds weird, but I'll throw a link to that in the notes below and you can check it out. But basically, the animal that I got is an otter, which means I like friends, I like people, I like to be happy, I don't like to be sad, and I don't like to be serious. But there's a problem with that. The problem is that Jesus says sometimes it's good to be sad. Sometimes it's good to be serious. And that's the theme of the second beatitude in Matthew 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, at first, this verse is really confusing because Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn. Or in other words, happy are those who are sad. Well, how can you be happy and sad at the same time? We'll deal with that in just a moment. But first, just think about some reasons why you might mourn in life, some reasons why you might be sad in life. Maybe it's because you look at the world around you, you watch the news, you go on Twitter, and you see all the just terrible stuff that's happening in our world, and it makes you sad. Or maybe someone you love dies, or you just think about some of the bad stuff that's happened to you or a friend of yours, you begin to mourn. But when Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, he's talking about something very specific. Remember, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is trying to get us to see the world as God sees the world. That's what he wants for Christians. He wants us to see the world through his perspective. And so because of that, when Jesus talks about mourning, he's talking about mourning because of sin. Now, I know that sin's a churchy word, and we don't use the word sin a lot at school or at work. You're not normally like, man, that guy really sinned in that meeting today, didn't he? We don't talk like that. At least I hope you don't talk like that. But the word sin simply refers to any time we fall short of God's standard. God says, here's how I want you to live your life. And when we don't do it, we sin. And if you begin to see the world as God sees the world, then you begin to mourn because you see sin all over the place. You see that so many people in our world don't really honor God with their lives. You see that so many people in our world are not compassionate and others focused, but they're very self-centered. Or even more personally, as you grow in your relationship with God as a Christian, you become aware of your own sin. You become aware of the things that you do that break God's heart. And this can make you profoundly sad, but that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be sad over your sins because it means you're beginning to see the world as Jesus sees it. You're beginning to see the world through God's eyes, and that's always a good thing. You're beginning to see that God is great and sin is so profoundly wrong. But remember what it says in this beatitude. It says that you will be comforted. Now, how will you be comforted? It doesn't mean that God in this life is just going to reverse all the bad stuff that's happened to you. It means that one day you will experience a world and eternity where all evil and sin are done away with forever. You see, that's God's promise in the Bible. There's a long history of God's people when they recognize their own sinfulness or the sinfulness of those around them who have mourned and wept and have been just sorrowful over it. And God's promise in the midst of all of those experiences to say that one day God will make everything right. One day God will fix everything in what the book of Revelation calls the new heavens and the new earth. And so this beatitude is very much related to the one that comes right before it in Matthew 5:3, where Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Remember, the hope for those who recognize that they're not perfect and they need God's help, the hope for those people, for us hopefully we are those people, the hope is heaven. And the way that we will be comforted through all the mourning and sorrow and sadness we feel in this life is when we recognize that God has a wonderful future, a wonderful paradise that he promises for us. Well, thanks so much for checking out my video. If you didn't see our other video on the Sermon on the Mount, check that out. And we're planning on doing more on the Beatitudes, so look for those soon. Please leave any comments or questions that you have in the comments below, and please subscribe to our channel.